On the evening of June 17th, 1950, a routine motorcycle ride through the East German countryside would become one of the most significant close encounter cases of the early UFO era. Oskar Linke, a 48-year-old former Wehrmacht major who served as mayor of Gleimershausen, was returning home with his 11-year-old daughter, Gabrielle, when their journey took an unexpected turn near the town of Hasselbach. The tyre on Oskar's motorcycle blew out, forcing father and daughter to continue on foot toward Hasselbach in the twilight hours. As they walked along the road, pushing the disabled motorcycle, Gabrielle suddenly pointed towards something in the forest about 140 metres away. In the fading light, Oskar initially thought his daughter had spotted a young deer. Leaving his motorcycle near a tree, Oskar began walking toward the area Gabrielle had indicated. As he approached to within 55 metres of the location, his perception shifted dramatically. What he had taken for wildlife revealed itself to be two humanoid figures, now approximately 40 metres from his position. The beings wore what Oskar would later describe as shiny metallic clothing that shimmered in the dim light. They appeared to be bent over, examining something on the ground with intense focus. Oskar continued his approach, moving carefully, until he was only 10 metres from the mysterious figures. From this vantage point, peering over a small fence, he could now see what had captured their attention. Behind them sat an enormous object, which Oskar estimated to be between 13 and 15 metres in diameter. The craft resembled, in his words, a huge frying pan or oval warming pan. The object's design was unlike anything in Oskar's experience. Two distinct rows of holes punctuated its rim, each opening approximately 30 metres in circumference. The space between these two rows measured about 0.45 of a metre. Rising from the top centre of this metallic disc was a black conical tower standing approximately 3 metres high. As Oskar studied this extraordinary scene, Gabrielle, who had remained behind at a short distance, called out to him. The sound of her voice carried clearly through the evening air, immediately alerting the two figures to their presence. Oskar noted that one of the beings had what appeared to be a lamp attached to the front part of its body, which had been lighting up at regular intervals during their ground examination. The moment the figures became aware of Oskar and Gabrielle, they reacted with remarkable speed. Both beings immediately rushed to the craft, clambered up its side, and disappeared into the conical tower. Their manner of movement struck Oskar as unusual. Years later, when pressed for details by American ufologist Leon Davidson in 1958, Oskar would describe their motion as a glide similar to that of bears. Once the beings had entered the craft, the object began its departure sequence. The holes along the rim started to glow with an intense light, initially green but gradually shifting to red. A slight humming sound filled the air, growing steadily louder. As Oskar watched in amazement, the black conical tower began to retract, sliding down into the centre of the disc. The entire craft then started to rise from the ground while simultaneously rotating like a top. Oskar observed that it appeared to be supported by a cylindrical component that had descended from the top of the object, passed through its centre, and now extended from the bottom to the ground. This gave the craft, in its elevated position, the appearance of a large mushroom. As the object continued to rise, now surrounded by a ring of flame spurting from the holes along its spinning rim, the supporting cylinder retracted back into the craft's centre. The rate of ascent increased dramatically and the cylinder reappeared from the top of the object. Both Oskar and Gabrielle heard a distinctive whistling sound, which Oscar compared to the sound of a falling bomb, though not as loud. The craft then shifted from its vertical ascent to a horizontal trajectory, moving parallel to the ground as it headed toward the neighbouring town of Stockholm to the southwest. Oscar, drawing on his military experience, noted that it moved faster than any fighter plane he had ever seen, accompanied by what he described as a terrible roaring sound. The sighting was not limited to Oscar and Gabrielle. A shepherd named George de Bost, positioned approximately a mile to a mile and a half away from the encounter site, reported seeing what he initially thought was a comet that had bounced off the Earth. An unnamed sawmill worker in the area described observing a low-flying comet at the same time. Multiple residents of the region later came forward to report seeing an unusual object they had taken to be a comet moving at low altitude. After the object had disappeared from view, Oscar returned to the landing site to investigate. Where the craft had rested, he discovered a circular depression in the ground, freshly made and matching the exact dimensions of the conical tower. The earth had been pressed down with considerable force. Additionally, Oscar observed that the vegetation in a neighbouring grain field had been flattened, apparently by the cold airstream generated by the departing craft. The political context of Oscar's encounter added another layer of complexity to his experience. East Germany in 1950 was under Soviet control, and Oscar initially interpreted what he had seen through this lens. As he would later explain, "When I saw this object, I immediately thought that it was a new Soviet military machine. I confess that I was seized with fright because the Soviets do not want anyone to know about their work. Many persons have been restricted to their movements for many years in East Germany because they know too much." This fear of Soviet reprisal kept Oscar silent about his experience for 2 years. The encounter occurred while he was still serving as mayor of Gleimershausen, a position that made discretion essential. Oscar later revealed that he had never even heard the term flying saucer until after his escape to West Berlin. The concept of unidentified flying objects as a phenomenon was completely unknown to him at the time of his sighting. In 1952, Oscar made the dangerous decision to flee East Germany with his wife and their 6 children. Once safely in West Berlin, he felt secure enough to report his experience to authorities. On July 9, 1952, exactly 2 years after keeping his encounter secret, Oscar and Gabrielle appeared before a judge to provide sworn testimony about their experience. West Berlin intelligence officers were present during this formal affidavit, keenly interested in what might have been evidence of advanced Soviet technology. When Oscar was asked to provide additional details about the being's appearance, he offered an intriguing description. In an account published in the German newspaper Nightmarish, Oscar stated they were dressed in heavy garments like people wear in polar regions. This detail, combined with the metallic shimmering quality of their clothing, suggested to investigators of the time that these might have been Soviet personnel testing experimental aircraft in the remote areas of East Germany. Oscar's professional background lent credibility to his account. As a former Wehrmacht major, he possessed military training in observation and aircraft identification. His position as mayor gave him standing in the community and little reason to fabricate such a story. When the case was investigated by ufologist Ted Blocher in 1980, he noted that Oscar's testimony remained consistent across multiple retellings, with no contradictions or embellishments added over time. The technical details Oscar provided proved particularly interesting to investigators. The two rows of holes around the rim, which served as some form of propulsion system, shooting red and green flames, suggested a jet propulsion mechanism unlike anything in known aviation technology of the era. The retractable conical tower that served as both an entry point and possibly a periscope or command centre represented an innovative design element. The craft's ability to transition from vertical takeoff to high-speed horizontal flight demonstrated capabilities beyond contemporary aircraft. The physical evidence left behind added weight to Oscar's account. The circular depression where the conical tower had pressed into the earth provided tangible proof that something substantial had been present. The flattened grain in the adjacent field created a secondary trace of the object's presence and departure. Years later, when American news outlets picked up the story, it was presented as potentially the first credible eyewitness report of a, quote, Soviet-guided missile. The 1952 telenews documentary film, the earliest known UFO documentary, featured Oscar and Gabriel's case prominently, with the narrator describing it as the most credible received among flying saucer reports. Oscar maintained his account without variation throughout his life. When contacted by researchers in 1958, 6 years after his initial report, he confirmed all the major details and expanded on certain aspects, such as the gliding movement of the beings. He never attempted to profit from his experience or seek publicity, factors that investigators considered when evaluating his credibility. The Hasselbalch encounter remains one of the most detailed and well-documented early close encounter cases. With 2 primary witnesses, multiple secondary observers who saw the object from a distance, physical traces at the landing site, and the consistent testimony of a credible witness with military and civic credentials, it stands as a significant incident in the early history of unidentified flying objects. Whether the craft Oscar and Gabriel encountered that evening was of Soviet origin, as Oscar initially believed, or something else entirely, their detailed observation provides a remarkable window into one of the most puzzling encounters of the early Cold War era.